Mike is just a phenomenal, phenomenal ICS speaker, and we're just so honored and privileged to have you here today. Over to you.
You're way too kind, but thank you. Thank you, Leslie, and thanks to all the volunteers helping put on the con. It's been a great morning so far, and hopefully everybody's having a great time. I know my contact info is being covered up, so I put some links in the Slack channel in case anybody wants to look for any of the resources that I'm going to be talking about as we go along. So again, I appreciate everybody for coming. Uh, Quick disclaimer, everything we're going to talk about is me, myself, and I. It's not to be held against the companies I work for or with. Not that I'm going to talk about anything horrible. Real quickly about me, I've been a computer nerd since day one. I've also actually been a computer like cybersecurity nerd pretty much since day one, and it's just always what I wanted to do. Um, and that's what I've been doing. I've been very fortunate to work in IT and cybersecurity. I've been full-time cybersecurity for 20 plus years at this point. I think 25 actually when you look at it. And you can see I have tons of certifications. I actually just finished my master's through SANS for ICS OT cybersecurity. So that was really exciting. What we're here to talk about today, though, of course, is when we talk about industrial control systems or operational technology. And really, we're talking about different environments that really I think of, power the world around us or empower the world around us. So whether it's actually one of the world's largest power plants in the upper left-hand corner there. There's the New York Bridge. Not a ton of control systems there, but there's some. Or so the company I work with, we run the subways in Denver, Colorado, which is in the middle of the United States, if you're not familiar. And then our largest project is a $50 billion LNG port facility for Shell up in northern Canada, which is at that lower the left-hand corner. So I'm very fortunate that I work for one of the world's largest engineering companies. So I've been able to work in some of the world's largest industrial control environments and work with and learn from some of the world's best engineering minds. So it's absolutely phenomenal that I really got lucky. At the same time, trying to get into industrial controls and cybersecurity was really challenging, and it was very frustrating. And I hear that can actually be the same for folks still today. And so part of this conversation and even the conversation about trashy reality TV, it's really about, I've had to go down these paths and I've had the frustrations and the difficulties and hopefully I can help others, be able to kind of shortcut those things and it doesn't have to be frustrating and here's maybe a couple of tips on how to go about this and hopefully help a few folks. So before we really get into the rest of the conversation, though, I just wanted to level set and really talk about the differences between when we talk about IT and then if we say industrial control systems, ICS, or operational technology or OT. And for this presentation, just say if I say ICS or OT, or sometimes you'll hear me say control systems, it's all the same thing for this presentation. There's small technical differences, but really at the end of the day, it's the same. You might also, some folks still say SCADA, right? It's kind of just let's group it all together for this presentation. But in IT, you can think we sit in a back office, maybe we work from home and we're sitting there on our laptop or workstation and we're using different applications. We have a ton of data at our disposal. We're probably browsing the internet and reading email and we're safe and warm and cozy. Whereas in OT, this is where, in this picture, you might have somebody out in the field doing operations and maintenance work, right? It's not warm and cozy. It's actually very dangerous in a lot of industrial control or OT environments, even maybe in a simple manufacturing plant. It's you're not safe, right? There's always an element of risk, right? That alone, I always focus on. But also when we start looking at the systems that we use to control these different types of environments. So whether it is a power plant or we talk about the subway trains in Denver, Colorado, or that LNG facility up in Canada. So really, what does that look like and how we can work with? And that's part of what I wanted to talk about this morning or today because it's again, I remember how, I think, confusing and frustrating it was for me to try to learn about this originally. And it's actually not black magic or as mysterious or complicated as you would think once you start getting into it. And again, that's really kind of the purpose of the presentation. Now, one thing I did want to talk about also is to highlight, this idea that when you think of like a power plant, the idea is any OT environment or like a manufacturing facility, right? There's always, we talk about, I hate the terms, but we'll use them for now. There's the IT side of the house and there's the OT side of the house. And the IT side of the house, that's where we have everybody in the back office sitting at their laptops processing information. And then the OT side is where we have the facilities or the site that's producing something. Right, we're generating power, or like with Fluor, we built the world's largest manufacturing facility for insulin. Right, and so when I think of that insulin plant, right, and like any manufacturing, that we're manufacturing something that you should like to think that the world needs. And so as we create, in that case, insulin injections, right, the OT environment or the plant, it has to send to IT data to tell it at a bare minimum, think, hey, we made this amount of insulin injections today. So that way, the folks in the back office, they can take that information, they can coordinate things like shipping and logistics. And of course, the business can get paid at the end of the day, right? That's why they're probably there and in existence. So we take information from OT and send it to IT. Now, where we get into trouble in the OT world is sometimes, and in a lot of environments, right, we have communication that's allowed to move from IT and then into OT. And if you have a pathway from IT into OT, right, an attacker, if they get onto the OT network, they will find that path and they will use it. Right? And we know it's not a question of if, right? It's only a question of when. And so we have these paths. So the best thing we can do is we can put a firewall between IT and OT and don't allow IT to talk directly to OT, but still allow OT to send the data to IT that it needs for the business to function. And that's really the best thing you can do. And that can help you avoid the vast majority of risk in your environment. But I think that's a whole other conversation, but just kind of keep it in the back of your mind for right now. So when I first started getting into ICS or OT, it was 2010 when we started hearing about this thing called Stuxnet. And Stuxnet is still today considered this technological marvel, where you had the United States and Israel teamed up to create a cyber weapon to target Iran's nuclear weapons program. And it's an incredible story, but at the end of the day, right, the idea is that you had nation states get malware into a control system environment where the Iranians had their nuclear or their centrifuges that would spin uranium gas to enrich it to ultimately make a nuclear weapon. So the idea was that Stuxnet comes in, takes over the control systems. It does a whole bunch of really super nifty things, especially to hide its activity. And so if you're an operator sitting in the control room for that facility, everything looks good. But behind the scenes, these centrifuges were actually physically kind of were spinning up and spinning down and spinning up and spinning down. And they were using physics to physically break down these centrifuges over time. And the Iranians had no clue what was going on for months. All they knew were they were losing these centrifuges that they couldn't replace really easily because of sanctions. And so it did set back the Iranian nuclear program. Some people say 3, 4, 5, 6 years, right? So, and there's points to that, I guess. From a cybersecurity perspective, I think there was two things that really happened here is one, you saw, governments around the world, especially, of course, we talk about Russia and China, they saw another nation state, in this case, well, at least the United States and Israel, attacking another nation state, and nothing happened. There were no consequences, at least openly. And they said, well, if they can do it, well, we can do it too. And at the same time, I think also the Chinese and the Russians and other countries out there probably realized, looking at the the beauty of Stuxnet, again, from a technological perspective, they realized they were probably way behind the curve, I would imagine. That's just me. But I think again, it was kind of this Pandora's box that we opened, and this was really the beginning. And so over time, we started to worry about nation states coming into control system in environments. And so how do we protect these different types of environments? And that's where we're getting these conversations about different systems like PLCs and DCS and RTU and HMIs and EWS, right? All these acronyms, and then data historians. Right? You get all these acronyms, and again, but it's not complex. It's not complicated. It just seems like that at first, but again, it's not that dark magic that we have. Or go back to the earlier presentation, right? But I always like to focus on this idea of that real world impact. And it's what happens if that facility goes down. If in this case we talk about if there's a power plant and it goes down for a few hours, you know what? Not the end of the world, right? We can continue to function and we'll be okay. But what if we don't have power for a few days, right? Then that becomes a little different. Okay, we can survive. We'll make it. Not the end of the world. But then you start to get the idea, right? A few weeks, or what about a few months? Then you start to get into kind of Walking Dead territory, I think, right? With the breakdown of civilization. And yes, that's an extreme example. But at the same time, those are some of those conversations we still have to have. Because what happens if our OT environment, whatever it does, goes down? Let's say even on average for 10 days, we have to take it down. And it takes us 10 days to restore functionality. Can we live without that plant for 10 days? If we lost the world's largest insulin producer for 10 days, there would be an impact to people's health. And honestly, there's a chance that somebody would die because of that. I mean, that's especially with the insulin shortage today. So it's very seriously. But I do want to talk about PLCs. This idea is what is a PLC? Because I want to talk about programmable logic controllers because it's the most common type of true control system we have in OT environments. And the idea is it's just like your normal thermostat you have in most offices or homes today, where it's actually just another computer. It has its own processor, it has its own memory, it has its own little operating system, right? It's running code. It might have a little storage space, really just to store the code itself. It's right, it's not storing a 100 gig Excel spreadsheet, thankfully, right? But the idea is that a PLC is, again, it's just another computer. And normally you have what we call a set point. And you see, this is actually on the thermostat itself, right? It says, hey, we've chosen to set the thermostat at a specific temperature that we want the room to always be at, right? We want the room to always be 70 degrees. Okay, so it's set to 70 degrees. And the thermostat has a sensor, right, where it's always continually bringing in, well, what's the temperature in the room? What's the temperature in the room? What's the temperature in the room? It's just continually checking. So that way, well, what if, let's say the temperature gets a little warm, right? What if it gets up to 71? The logic, right, inside the PLC said, ooh, it's getting over 70 degrees. So we need to send a signal. So we literally send a little electrical signal out a physical wire that's connected to the air conditioner to turn the air conditioner on. Right? So that's when we talk about cyber physical systems. Really, for the most part, we always like to talk about PLCs, right? It's a computer that can send a signal to turn on a system to make something move out in the real world. So we send that signal, right, to the air conditioner to turn it on. Air conditioner kicks on, cool air comes into the room, and the temperature gets back down to 70 degrees, right? Well, and remember, the thermostat's always continually bringing in that sensor data. It's always continually checking the temperature. And so then eventually it's like, oh, okay, well, we're back to 70 degrees. So, we're going to send another signal to the air conditioning unit down our little wire to tell it, hey, go ahead and turn off. And then the thermostat just keeps doing what it does over and over and over, right? And sometimes you call this like the control loop or maybe the closed loop. I've heard a couple of different ways. But again, that's the idea of a PLC. Again, it's just a small computer that has different wires, and they call ins and outs or inputs and outputs. So you can bring in data like from a sensor, like to take the temperature, and then you can send signals out to things like an air conditioning or a heating unit, right? To be able to turn on and off those systems to, again, do things. And that's really what we're talking about when we get into operational technology. Right. Now, Trisis wasn't an incident we had in 2017. And this is where the Russian nation state had come in to a petrochemical facility in the Middle East that was owned and operated by Saudi Aramco. And and what was key about this, and everybody in the industry thought, oh, this is the one incident that's going to wake up the world, and they're going to take industrial control security seriously. Um, Kind of spoiler alert, it didn't, unfortunately, but it was a step in the right direction. But in this case, the Russians, they had control over the entire environment. They even had control over what they call the SIS, or the safety instrumented systems. And what this is it's basically different types of specialized controllers, kind of like PLCs, that they're responsible for acting as the fail-safe, the backup fail-safe for the environment. So if we ever detect a fault condition that could lead to someone getting hurt, right, or the environment in which the plant sits and becoming harmed, or the plant itself, right, becoming harmed, right, we want to shut down the plant so none of those things happen. And so that's the job of the SIS. And the Russians had basically 99.99% control over the SIS. They just made one programming error, like a real easy programming error, and that it caused the SIS to crash. And the vendors came in and they looked at it and said, this is not our firmware. You need to bring in someone like Dragos with Rob Lee and Leslie's company to actually investigate. And I was actually taking Rob Lee's SANS course at the time. So I was getting kind of the play-by-play of what was happening at lunch and at dinner. And it was, I mean, you can't pay for that type of experience, right? And getting this understanding. And the way, again, Rob explained it was, they had made this one little tiny programming error, and that the gentleman that was actually doing the response basically had fixed it in about 30 seconds and had a fully functional working copy of the malware. So fascinating, from that perspective. But Rob always makes the point that when the only reason that an attacker would take control over the SIS is to kill somebody. He highlights that a lot of times. And again, that's one of the reasons we thought with Trisis, sometimes people talk about Trident as well, it's the Mandiant name, that that was what was going to wake up the world to the importance of control system cybersecurity. But it didn't. And thankfully or not thankfully, we didn't have to wait, I guess, too long in the grand scheme of things for another incident to happen, which really helped. But we'll talk about that in a second, right? But I go back to looking at the PLC example, or when we talk about the thermostat, right? And this idea of where does the risk come from? Because we talk about 10, 15, 20 years ago, and you would go into a power plant or a manufacturing facility, you had control systems, but they kind of existed on their own. They had their own protocols, and they talked in, right, their own languages, and it wasn't something that attackers were able to get to very easily. Where today, remember, just like that thermostat you have in your home network, right? It could have an IP address, and your home network is connected to the internet. And of course, the attackers are connected to the internet, which means in some way, shape, or form, they can be connected to you. And I always think of it doesn't matter if it's a home network or, I can swap that out for a power plant, right? It's the same concept. that if that power plant in some way, shape, or form has connectivity to the internet, then the attackers have access, potentially, right? There's a way potentially for them to get that foothold. And we've seen things like somebody puts CCTV on your OT network and they expose it directly to the internet. The attackers can take control over that very easily, and then they have their foothold. Or what about the employee in the IT back office that falls for that phishing campaign? Right? In this case, again, the power plant just there's a combustion chamber which we use to create steam to turn a turbine at 1.110, right? That then churns, that's supposed to be a generator at 1.1, right? That generates electricity. And that's supposed to be a PLC at 1.10. But yeah, it's all the same concept. So it doesn't have to be that difficult. And when you go into different OT environments, if you go into a power plant versus a manufacturing facility versus a subway, yeah, they're all very different environments. Most of they're very unique. But the way that we can defend them, the tools that we have at our disposal are very, very similar. And there's a lot of overlap with IT. There's a lot of commonalities between IT and OT cybersecurity. So if you want to get into ICS or OT cybersecurity, don't think you're starting from scratch and don't let people in OT tell you that because they will. And I understand IT and OT cybersecurity are also they can be very different, but they also have a lot in common. You just have to know when they have those things in common and when they are very different. Like vulnerability management is very different in the ICS world. Incident detection and response, it kind of works the same for the most part. Right? So Colonial Pipeline, and this was just a couple of years ago, this actually did change, I think, the landscape for a lot of people. Still not to as much as we wanted in the field, but the idea that when Colonial Pipeline was when the United States had its largest gasoline pipeline taken offline for 10 days. Right? And it wasn't a nation state attacker, right? It wasn't Russia or China or the United States coming in and taking the pipeline offline. It was actually a ransomware infection. Right? You had a ransomware group out of Russia called DarkSide. I'm still Star Wars nerd, so I'll go with it, right? So you had a ransomware group that they weren't targeting the United States' largest gasoline pipeline, right? They were just sending out phishing campaigns to every email address, to every person in the world that they had, just hoping somebody clicked on a link or opened up an attachment to infect their system to get that initial foothold on their IT network to spread, right? And at the end of the day, they want to infect the systems and get paid so they can move on to the next victim. Right? Again, they weren't targeting an OT environment. They were just targeting email addresses. But when they saw that all of a sudden you had, like where I live in Greenville, South Carolina, which is on the East Coast, right? We would go to the gas station and they had no gas. Now, you could go around the corner and there was another gas station that had gas. You just had to wait in line for it. So it wasn't the end of the world, but there were real world repercussions there. And so I think people started to pay attention, right? At least a little bit more. The problem is it wasn't just the defenders and private citizens and the asset owners and the operators or the people that own and run ICS and OT environments. But of course, the attackers realize that. Again, it's not the nation states that we really are worried about these days. Sure, they're there, but it's the ransomware groups in particular, because the ransomware group operators saw, oh, look what happened, right? They had to take this pipeline down for 10 days and it cost, I mean, tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions. It's like, what was the real world impact? Like, yeah, we could probably make some money there. And that's what you see. Like every year, I consider the Dragos year in review report that Dragos puts out mandatory reading, especially if you're in ICS or OT. And I think it was about 750, 800 ransomware attacks or incidents in OT environments that we know of last year. And 75, 80% of them, majority were in manufacturing. And what happens, even if the average downtime is, again, 10 days, What's going to happen? What's the impact? I was also think about not just the potential for people getting hurt on the job or the environment becoming harmed, but I always also think about people losing their jobs because we were down and we lost revenue, we lost money, and we have to let people go. That's one of the things I always, that's why I do cybersecurity. The Colonial Pipeline did change. We just start wondering what's going to happen next before people really start paying attention. Because there are some people, especially like in the ICS community, I call them the grumpy old white guys because they're that. And they even talk about how, well, we don't really need to do things for cybersecurity because nobody's died yet. And they say it just like that. It's like nobody's died yet. So they're waiting for people to die before they're going to do something about it, which just absolutely blows my mind. So again, when we look at who's coming after, this is Midjourney's interpretation of you have nation states on the right-hand side, the ransomware group operators in the middle, and we also have hacktivists, which have got some traction over the last couple of months because there is a group out of Iran called the Cyber Avengers, which I still have to laugh every time I say that name. But they were targeting these PLCs that were exposed directly to the internet, and they actually had a built-in they call HMI or a screen, and so they could put their little hacked logo, kind of like when you used to deface websites back in the old days. So, uh, yes, grumpy old white men, and so those are really yeah. Nation states are sure there, and I have some of the more sensitive environments in my day job where we do see nation state adversaries, undoubtedly. And yeah, hacktivists, we have those individuals out there or groups of individuals, sure. But it's the ransomware groups that really are impacting our OT environments these days. And that's where I think the main concern is. So if anything, we think IT and OT, they have a lot in common now because ransomware groups are our number one threat. So, and that's not something we would have said in OT like 3 or 4 years ago, not before Colonial Pipeline. So that world, it really has changed for better and for worse. So. But if you want to learn more about industrial controls, because we have to get to trashy reality TV. But I do have a couple of free ebooks out there. They're in my GitHub repository, or you can find the links on myholcomb.com, or feel free to ping me on LinkedIn and such. Definitely you can find me there. But there's a blue version for folks, probably most everybody here, if you're coming from an IT cybersecurity background. The purple ones, if you're like you're an engineer coming from OT or automation. And then I actually have a free course that I put on YouTube, and I actually just finished it with the last part. It actually came out to be about 25 hours. So I've got a lot of great feedback. So hopefully it sounds like people are enjoying and they're learning a lot. So definitely, if you're interested in learning more, definitely feel free to check that out. So a lot of people are just looking for part 10, which is the pen test, the intro to ICS pen testing. So check that one out. It actually is based off of MITRE ATT&CK framework for ICS that MITRE actually worked with Dragos to put together. So if you're interested, kind of play off the last talk. So anyways, all right. So the last part of this section, this is why I really appreciate what Leslie's done with PancakesCon. It's this idea that we're not just cybersecurity, right? We're not just, or like in my case these days, I'm not, just ICS, OT cyber. There's more to life. And there has to be, right? Otherwise we go crazy, we burn ourselves out, and there's too much stress in our lives and anxiety. That's my two drugs of choice are stress and anxiety. And it's just too much, right, for us. And that's not good for us. It's not good for the environments or the people that we're trying to help. It's obviously not good for our friends and their families. And so we start looking at, other things we can do outside of uh, cybersecurity. And I'm still trying to even find more hobbies without a screen. And here we're talking about a TV show, so there is a screen involved. So I'm working. I do love going to like shows and plays, but and we talk. My girlfriend, my partner, and I we're big foodies, but there's a lot of expenses, with those things as well. So we're very fortunate to get to go do those things, but it's not always out there. And I love going and walking outside and in nature, which is always great. The pollen is off the scales right now, though, and for me, I can't breathe in that. So I have to have some other alternatives, or even if I just need 30 minutes of downtime. I play a lot of video games as well, but again, trying to get away at least from a computer screen. And so we look at reality TV, and if you watch any reality TV shows, throw them in the Slack channel. I'm just curious to see who's out there. A lot of people don't, and probably like myself, never admitted to watching reality TV. I was putting this list together. I'm like, well, I don't watch a lot of TV, and I don't definitely watch a lot of reality TV because that's just a waste of time. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I watch a lot of TV and I watch a lot of reality TV. And so, I've seen every episode of Survivor. I've seen every episode of Top Chef. I'm one of the biggest Project Runway fans that you would. I really love Tim Gunn. So I'm just a Tim Gunn fan, but I've seen every Project Runway episode, even though I'm not a fashion person, right? Big Brother, The Challenge. We found The Challenge during COVID. Now we've, watched all the, I think, what seasons like 11 through 40. We didn't watch the first 10 because it's just really old video. It's really hard to watch, right? The Traders Now. I like the UK Apprentice version. That's kind of fun. Some people like adventure shows. That's not really my thing, but I know some people like them. Makeover. I remember the original Queer Eye when they came out. I loved that show. And the new version is not bad either, but definitely love the original one. Where we get into, and this we talk about like the modern era of reality TV, docu-series. So the biggest one probably is the Kardashians, right? Or any of the Real Housewives series. So Party Down South was one that a friend of mine, she would watch as a way, and she mentioned it like to kind of decompress. She had a really, stressful job, and that was how she would like take a break and see that. So I definitely see, yeah, a bunch of folks throwing everything from Amazing Race, Big Brother, yeah, a few of those. I actually do like Alone, even though I'm not a survival person. Alone is actually a pretty cool show. Um, Anyways, and then dating shows. I've tried to watch. I don't. I have a partner for 7+ years, so I don't know. It's weird watching a dating show if you actually have. That's just me. I know it's different for different people. But when you talk about the trashy reality TV, usually we're talking about, yeah, dating shows and docu-series. This is more, yeah, according to Mike Holcomb, my opinion itself. And I remember the Real World had started, and it was on MTV. And you see 1992. This is where I consider like modern reality TV started, because they had like Candid Camera like in the 50s and the original dating shows. So there were a few, types of reality TV. Yes, very long time ago. I don't 1992 was a long time ago too, right? But you take people that at that time were my age, right? You put them in an apartment in New York. And I was just absolutely fascinated. I always wanted to go to New York. I lived in San Diego, my whole life. And it was really interesting to watch. And MTV went on, of course, to do things like the Osbournes and the Challenge, right? So some of the bigger, more impactful reality TV shows that reality TV would not exist without those MTV shows, which is really fascinating to think about. But there's different shows. As we kind of start going through this list, and you can see in the chat, right? There's different shows for different people, right? There's just always things that we look. I was talk about, yeah, it's just like, if you look at someone's, browser favorites or maybe their history, right? You could definitely tell people are into different things, right? If it's just for fun, you can look at the big three for sex, money, power, right? maybe you have a competitive nature. I do like the competition shows, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But maybe sometimes there's like maybe there's like some health benefit, physically or mentally. There's some benefit there as well. In different shows, and or maybe you're just into it for the drama. I used to say, oh, I would, oh, I don't watch shows because of the drama, or like when people go at it, even on Project Runway, I'm like, oh, I hate that. Then I realized, you know what? I actually like the drama. Without the drama, then it's actually kind of boring. So Survivor came out in 2000, and originally, like, oh, this sounds kind of stupid, but I was in San Diego, and we had a friend of a friend who they were the composer for the theme music. Most of the people that originally worked on the show lived in San Diego, and and so my friend and I, we actually watched it, and on the first episode, we actually made bets to see who, like we say, who would either win or at least make it the furthest in the show. I actually won. I actually picked the winner from day one. If anybody ever watched, I picked Richard Hatch because I'm like, this guy's a snake, and he's no one's expecting it. He's gonna go all the way, and he did. But it was really one of those things that was really interesting because it was one of those, and a lot of the speakers, at least in track one today, have talked about, right, this need not only to get out of our cybersecurity shell, but expanding, like there's the social circles and even playing D&D with others, right? It's getting out, and so I would get out with my friend that became multiple friends, and we had this whole thing around Survivor, which is really strange to think about these days. But again, it kind of goes back to this point and why I really appreciate PancakesCon. It's this whole idea of your entire life can't be about cybersecurity or can't be the company that you work for. I mean, I've been there, I've done that, right? And that company went bankrupt, and it was like my life was over. And it shouldn't be that way. It's a job at the end of the day. And yes, what we do in cybersecurity is very, very important. But it's still a job at the end of the day. I mean, yes, there's the mission, but we also have to keep it in perspective at the same time. Again, just to make sure we don't kill ourselves in the process of trying to help others and protect the world at large, right? And doing other things, even if it's watching really crappy, trashy television, right? It can help us be more creative and better problem solvers and help us be better people at the end of the day, even though that might sound really, really strange. And talking about, yeah, getting out there and yes, being more physical, which is, something I always still have to work on, and social, which is also something I have to work on, right? But it's best for our mental health. I mentioned my drugs of choice are stress and anxiety, right? And that's, and kind of what I've had to really work through. And part of doing that is finding these other avenues to explore, including trashy reality TV. I actually monitor my stress and anxiety by watching my heart activity, believe it or not. And this is where I get into Scandival as we kind of wrap up. But the idea is, and some of you might be familiar, nobody really knows. I love TV, obviously, apparently, maybe too much. I love movies. Used to always go to the movies before COVID. And I even more so sometimes I actually love the business around like TV and movies. So I love, the behind the scenes of, not only like how much are they making or, how many viewers are they getting, but even, producers and what are they doing, and as they move around and people move between agencies and companies, and I really get into that. So I read a lot of those types of websites. And I just remember every website talking about Scandival. Like, nothing. I've never seen a news story blow up in the news like this in the entertainment news ever. Nothing. It's like I I don't even know. It's like World War II started, right? I mean, it was just amazing. I mean, just so I'm like, oh, I have to look at this. And so Scandival is actually from Vanderpump Rules, which is a spin-off from the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And it was all about one of the main the characters, people on the show called Tom Sandoval, and he cheated on his girlfriend Ariana with one of their friends. And this was Scandival. And so, and it was actually happening. So it was about to be revealed on the show. So in like the course of about, I think 2.5 weeks, I binged 9.5 seasons of Vanderpump Rules. And the one thing I saw was looking at my heart monitor when I was watching trashy reality TV. It had the same effect on my heart, just as meditation and yoga would. And the whole idea is that with meditation and yoga, right, you can come, really, like out of your mind and that always like thinking part, right? Where you're always on and thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow or what happened in the past, or where focus on the present, so it allows our minds to actually breathe, right? And have some quiet time of its own. And so it helps relieve stress and anxiety and depression to some degrees, right? So it helps us feel better and ideally, hopefully, be better people overall. And I thought it was really fascinating that I could find a TV show like Vanderpump Rules where I wasn't emotionally invested, right? The other shows that I watched, like even Project Runway, I'm emotionally invested in those shows, right? I want people to certain people to win, and so those don't count. But if it's and I know this is horrible, but if you don't not emotionally invested in those people, then it's really takes you kind of into that meditative place. It was very strange to see, but it was kind of where I was going with the presentation. So it really was a little bit more of stress management, anxiety management, and kind of overall well-being. But I mentioned we like to go to a lot of shows. I was really fortunate to see the Cirque du Soleil show a couple of times this weekend, called Corteo. And the very end, the main character talks about, yeah, my grandfather told me life was like riding a bicycle. Like if you go too fast, you get tired and you need to stop. Or if you go too slow, maybe you fall. And I know that's a big thing I work on, is trying to find that middle ground, right? Which makes sense for me, and hopefully it's something that everybody else can do as well. So I appreciate the time, and again, Leslie and the crew for having me on. So thank you again. I know we might have a minute or two for questions, but again, if you have questions that come up after, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can give me my email address. There's again my YouTube channel that has the 25-hour ICS course, and then mycolcom.com, which is just links to all my resources. So again, thank you, everybody.